She defended an alien baby against her own kind. The interstellar xenological Peace Corps vessel. Prudent consideration hung in orbit around Veluria IV like an elongated metallic teardrop. Its hull, designed to slice through space-time with minimal resistance, glinted in the light of the binary stars that dominated this sector. Inside, Lieutenant Margot Kelly was doing what she did best, arguing with her superior officer. "With all due respect, Commander," Margot said, keeping her voice level despite her rising frustration. "The Velurian communication patterns clearly indicate distress. Their subspace transmissions contain the harmonic resonances we've classified as their emergency frequencies." Commander Harlow Phillips, a man whose spine seemed permanently fused into perfect military posture, stared at her with the same expression he'd wear when discovering an unauthorized potted plant in the ship's corridors. "Lieutenant Kelly, the Diplomatic Corps has explicitly labeled Veluria IV as a non-intervention zone following the Cygnus Accords. Your interpretation of their communications is noted but irrelevant." Margot resisted the urge to roll her eyes. The Cygnus Accords, that magnificent piece of bureaucratic gymnastics that basically translated to, "Don't help anyone unless they can offer us something valuable in return." She joined the Corps to make a difference, not to orbit planets in distress while filing reports about their demise. "Sir, I've been studying Velurian patterns for 3 years. This isn't a standard cultural transmission. It's a planetary SOAS." Commander Phillips's nostrils flared slightly, the only indication that he was experiencing an emotion. "Your expertise in xenolinguistics is why you're on this vessel, Lieutenant. Your expertise in interpreting Corps policy, however, appears lacking. The bridge is dismissed. We continue observation protocols." As the other officers filed out, Margot lingered at her console, fingers hovering over the translation matrix she'd been refining. The Velurians communicated primarily through bioluminescent patterns and subsonic vibrations, both easily missed by standard core scanning equipment. She'd modified her station to detect these subtleties after their first contact mission 2 years ago. The patterns now flashing across her screen were unmistakable. Help, danger, young ones, protect. Margot glanced around the now empty bridge. Sometimes, she reflected, rules existed to be broken, especially the stupid ones. With practiced efficiency, she downloaded her translation data onto a portable drive and headed toward the shuttle bay. She had approximately 23 minutes before anyone would notice her absence. Just enough time to launch a routine sensor maintenance shuttle and break atmosphere. The descent to Veluria IV was rougher than expected. The planet's ionosphere crackled with electromagnetic disturbances that weren't present during their initial survey. Margot's shuttle bucked and shuddered as she navigated through cloud layers thick with particulate matter. Something catastrophic had happened here since their last visit. When she finally broke through to clear air, the landscape below confirmed her fears. The sprawling crystal-like structures that had once dotted the violet plains were fractured and darkened. The bioluminescent rivers that had crisscrossed the continent now appeared dim and sluggish. Margot guided the shuttle toward the coordinates where the distress signals were strongest. As she approached, her sensors detected movement, hundreds of small rapid signatures converging on a central location. The Velurians were gathering, but whether for evacuation or battle she couldn't tell. "So much for a quick reconnaissance mission," she muttered to herself, setting the shuttle down in a clearing about a kilometer from the gathering point. She ran a final check on her equipment: translation device, emergency medical kit, and a standard-issue pulse disruptor that she technically wasn't authorized to carry planetside. Protocol be damned. The moment she stepped outside, the gravity hit her, about 1.2 times Earth standard, making her movements feel sluggish. The air smelled of ozone and something sweetly organic, like overripe fruit. She activated her environmental suit's minimal protection settings. Velurian atmosphere was breathable for humans but contained trace elements that could cause mild hallucinations after prolonged exposure. As Margot approached the gathering, the ground beneath her began to vibrate, in patterns, communications being transmitted through the soil itself. Her translator picked up fragments: breach, contamination, spawn, protect. The crowd of Velurians came into view as she crested a small ridge. They stood approximately 2 meters tall, their translucent bodies pulsing with internal light patterns that shifted from blues to purples to reds as they communicated. Their 6 limbs moved with liquid grace as they formed a tight circle around something in their midst, and surrounding this gathering was another group, different, Velurians whose light patterns pulsed angry red and orange. These carried what appeared to be crystalline implements that Margot recognized as weapons from the Corps' xenological database. "Well, this looks promising," Margot sighed, crouching behind a crystalline formation as she observed the standoff. Nothing says routine unauthorized mission like walking into an alien civil war. The confrontation below intensified as Margot watched. The outer group of Velurians, the ones with weapons, were emitting rapid-fire patterns of light that her translator struggled to keep up with. The inner circle maintained a defensive posture, their bodies forming a living barrier around whatever they were protecting. Contamination must be purged, her translator finally managed to interpret from the outer group. The breach has produced abomination. Central consciousness demands cleansing. The defending Velurians responded with their own light patterns, which her translator rendered as, "The young one bears no ill intent. It seeks only to exist. Violence against emergence is forbidden by the old patterns." Margot frowned. A religious conflict, perhaps, or maybe political factions. She'd need more context to understand, but one thing was clear. The outer group was preparing to attack the inner one, and whatever young one they were protecting was the focus of this conflict. Making a decision that would definitely get her court-martialed if she survived, Margot activated her communit's universal greeting protocol, a series of mathematical sequences that most spacefaring species recognized as non-threatening, and stepped out from her hiding place. The effect was immediate and dramatic. All light patterns ceased as every Velurian turned toward her, their translucent bodies briefly becoming almost transparent in what she recognized as their expression of shock. "Hello," Margot said, her translator converting her words into corresponding light patterns and subsonic vibrations. "I am Lieutenant Margot Kelly of the Interstellar Xenological Peace Corps. I received your distress signal and have come to offer assistance." For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then a ripple of communication spread through both groups, too complex and rapid for her translator to process. Finally, one Velurian from the inner circle approached, its body pulsing with cautious, blue-green patterns. "Human observer returns," it communicated. "You were told our world is closed to outsiders now." Margot nodded, recognizing the formal greeting patterns. "I received a distress call. I'm here unofficially to help if I can." The Velurian's lights shifted to a pattern indicating something like skepticism. "No call was sent to humans. The breach is our matter." "What breach?" Margot asked. "What young one are you protecting?" Before the Velurian could respond, the outer group surged forward, their weapons raised. The inner circle tightened defensively, and the Velurian speaking to Margot quickly rejoined its companions. Caught in the middle of this rapidly deteriorating situation, Margot did the only thing a trained Corps officer would do in such circumstances. She pulled out her unauthorized pulse disruptor, aimed it skyward, and fired a blast that temporarily ionized the air around them, creating a brilliant flash of purple light. All the Velurians froze, their bodies pulsing with what her translator identified as patterns of surprise and alarm. "Now that I have your attention," Margot said, struggling to keep her voice authoritative despite her pounding heart, "perhaps someone would be kind enough to explain what exactly is happening here before anyone does something regrettable." The aggressive Velurians hesitated, their weapon crystals still raised but not advancing. One of them, larger than the others with internal light patterns that pulsed with more complexity, moved forward. "Human presence is violation," it communicated, the translator rendering the light patterns into clipped, angry phrases. "This matter is Velurian purity concern. Depart or face consequence." Margot kept her disruptor visible, but lowered it slightly. "I understand your concern about outside interference, but I received clear distress signals. Something is wrong on Veluria, and as a representative of the Peace Corps, I'm obligated to investigate." "A lie," the Velurian leader pulsed. "No signal was sent. From the inner circle, the Velurian who had spoken to Margot earlier moved forward again. The young one may have called without knowledge. Its patterns are unconforming. This seemed to agitate the aggressive leader. The abomination must not communicate with outsiders. This confirms its danger. Margot's curiosity was now thoroughly piqued. I'd like to see this young one for myself. The two Velurian factions pulsed rapidly in their own internal communications, clearly debating the request. Finally, the defensive group's lights settled into a pattern of reluctant agreement. The circle parted slightly, and Margot was gestured forward. What she saw in the center of the protective ring made her breath catch. It wasn't a Velurian child as she had expected. It was something else entirely. About half a meter tall, the creature had a form that seemed to shift between solid and liquid states. Its surface rippled with colors that didn't match the Velurian communication patterns. Instead, they formed swirls and spirals that reminded Margot of Terran abstract art. It had no discernible limbs or sensory organs that she could identify, yet it somehow gave the impression of observing her intently. "What is it?" she asked, fascinated and confused. "We do not know," admitted the defender who had been communicating with her. "It emerged from the breach 3 cycles ago. The purifiers," it indicated the aggressive group, "believe it to be an invasive consciousness that must be destroyed. We of the pattern preservers believe all emergent life must be protected until its intentions are known." Margot crouched down to observe the strange being more closely. It responded to her presence by shifting its colors to match her environmental suit, blues and grays swirling across its amorphous surface. "It's mimicking me," she observed. "Some form of communication?" "It absorbs and reflects," the defender explained. "It learns. This is why the purifiers fear it. They believe it will absorb and replace." The leader of the purifiers moved closer, its light patterns intense. "The anomaly appeared after the sky tear. It is not of Veluria. It does not follow the patterns. It must be purged before it spreads." "Sky tear?" Margot asked. "You mean like a spatial rift?" The defender's lights pulsed affirmatively. A wound in reality opened above the northern crystalline plane. This one emerged. Then the tear closed. Margot's mind raced through possibilities. Spatial anomalies weren't uncommon in this sector, but usually they were natural phenomena that opened and closed without disgorging interdimensional beings. If this creature had indeed come through such a rift, it could explain why the core's sensors had detected unusual energy patterns in the planet's atmosphere. As she considered this, the small being shifted again, its surface now displaying patterns that eerily resembled Velurian communication lights but with subtle differences, as if it were speaking in an accent. Her translator pinged, struggling to interpret. Finally it produced, "Not harm, learn, find, home?" Margot stared in astonishment. "It's talking. It's learned your language." The purifier leader's lights flashed warning patterns. "It deceives. It mimics to infiltrate. This proves our assessment." But Margot was now fully invested. This wasn't just a xenological curiosity. This was a first contact situation with an entirely unknown species. And if she understood correctly, this alien child was lost, separated from its own kind, trying to communicate in a language it barely understood. "I want to help you," she said directly to the being, watching as her translator converted her words to light patterns. "Can you tell me more about yourself? Where you came from?" The being's surface rippled and new patterns formed. Patterns unlike anything Velurian. Her translator couldn't make sense of them, but there was something strangely familiar about the configurations, something that reminded her of, "Oh my God," Margot whispered as realization dawned. "It's not speaking in light patterns. It's trying to show us something." She quickly adjusted her translator's visual input parameters, reconfiguring it to interpret the patterns not as language, but as data, spatial coordinates. The result appeared on her device's screen, a 3-dimensional star map centered on a location about 12 light years from Veluria. "It's showing us its home," she said, a mixture of awe and excitement flooding through her. It's not an invasion, it's a lost child. The Purifier leader moved forward aggressively, its light patterns intensifying to near-painful brightness. Deception. The anomaly manipulates the human to gain sympathy. We have observed its patterns, it consumes our crystalline resources and grows. It is invasive. Margot looked back at the small being, noticing now that there were indeed tiny crystalline fragments embedded in its fluid-like body. The defender Velurian moved protectively closer to the creature. It requires sustenance to survive, the defender explained. The crystals are its only compatible energy source on our world. It does not take more than needed. Veluria's crystal formations are your primary resource, Margot said, understanding the conflict better now. You're worried it will deplete them. The crystals are not merely resources, the Purifier leader pulsed angrily. They are our future generation's growth medium. Each crystal consumed is potential life prevented. This was getting complicated. Margot could understand both perspectives. The creature needed to survive, but not at the expense of future Velurian generations. She needed more information. How much does it consume, she asked. The defender's lights dimmed slightly, and what Margot had learned was their equivalent of hesitation. More than is sustainable. Its needs grow as it does. That wasn't encouraging. Margot turned back to the small being, which was now producing patterns that her translator was beginning to decipher more clearly. Lost, separated from collective, no suitable environment, adaptation difficult. Margot considered the situation. If the creature came through a spatial rift, perhaps returning it to its own kind was the only viable solution. But with the rift closed and only rough coordinates to go on, that wouldn't be easy. I have a ship, she said, making a decision that would definitely end her career if Commander Phillips found out. I can take you to your home system. The being's surface rippled in what might have been excitement or relief, its colors brightening. The Purifier leader moved between Margot and the creature. Removing the anomaly violates isolation protocols. Velurian matters remain on Veluria. Margot straightened up, facing the Purifier directly. With respect, this isn't a Velurian matter. This is a lost alien being on your world, consuming your resources. If I remove it, both problems are solved. The Purifiers and Defenders began communicating rapidly among themselves, their light patterns too complex and overlapping for her translator to process. Finally, the Defender who had been speaking with her approached. The conclave is divided. Taking the young one requires approval from the central consciousness. You must present your proposal formally. Margot suppressed a groan. Bureaucracy, it seemed, was truly a universal constant. How long will that take? She asked. The central consciousness convenes in the Crystal Cathedral. We can bring you there now. Margot glanced at her chronometer. She'd already been gone from the ship for nearly an hour. Commander Phillips had almost certainly noticed her unauthorized departure by now. But she couldn't just leave this situation unresolved. Lead the way, she said, then turned to the small being. You're coming too. I think it's time everyone heard directly from you. The being's surface shimmered in what Margot chose to interpret as agreement, and it flowed toward her, stopping just short of touching her environmental suit. The circle of defenders moved with it, still protective, while the Purifiers followed. At a distance, their weapon crystals lowered but not sheathed. As they walked toward what appeared to be a massive crystalline structure on the horizon, Margot couldn't help but wonder what exactly she had gotten herself into. Unauthorized planetfall, interference in alien affairs, and now planning to transport an unknown life form on a core shuttle. All excellent ways to get permanently reassigned to monitoring unmanned beacons in the Oort cloud. But looking at the small being flowing alongside her, its surface now calmly displaying a pattern that resembled a simplified version of her own face, Margot knew she was doing the right thing. Corpse regulations be damned. She wasn't about to let an innocent child be destroyed just for being lost and hungry. The Crystal Cathedral wasn't actually a cathedral in any human sense of the word. It was a massive, hollowed-out geode formation that rose nearly 100 meters into the violet sky. Its exterior was rough and unassuming, but as Margot was led inside, the interior took her breath away. Countless crystal facets reflected and amplified the bioluminescent patterns of the Velurians, creating a three-dimensional communication space where light conversations bounced and intermingled throughout the cavernous chamber. At the center of this spectacular display was a concentrated nexus of light, brighter and more complex than any individual Velurian. This, Margot realized, was the central consciousness. Not a single entity, but a collective intelligence formed by the synchronized light patterns of dozens of elder Velurians whose translucent bodies were partially embedded in a central crystal formation. Impressive, Margot murmured as her translator struggled to make sense of the overlapping communication patterns. The defender, who had been her primary contact, pulsed softly. The central consciousness maintains harmony among all Velurian collectives. It preserves the patterns across generations. As they approached, the ambient light communications in the chamber dimmed, focusing attention on their small procession. The being beside Margot seemed to shrink slightly, its amorphous form becoming more compact as if trying to make itself less noticeable. The central consciousness's light patterns shifted, and a clear communication emerged that her translator rendered as human presence unexpected, explanation required. The purifier leader moved forward, its patterns sharp and urgent. The human interferes with purification protocols. It protects the anomaly and proposes removal, violating isolation directives. I came in response to distress signals, Margot replied, letting her translator convert her words. I found this being under threat, despite showing no hostile intent. As a Peace Corps officer, I'm offering a solution that benefits all parties. I'll take it to its home system, removing it from Veluria. The central consciousness pulsed with complex patterns that her translator interpreted as something like skepticism mixed with curiosity. No distress call was authorized. How did you receive such communication? Margot hesitated, then decided honesty was her best approach. This being, she gestured to the small creature beside her, appears to have sent the signal unintentionally. My equipment detected patterns consistent with distress. The chamber filled with rapid, agitated light communications among the Velurians. The central consciousness pulsed in patterns that somehow imposed order, quieting the others. The anomaly communicated beyond our world? The patterns conveyed alarm. This confirms purifier concerns, or it confirms that it's an intelligent being in distress, Margot countered. It's trying to get home. I've seen coordinates it displayed. It comes from a star system not far from here. The anomaly consumes our growth crystals. One part of the central consciousness pulsed. Each cycle it requires more. I understand your concerns, Margot said. That's why removal is the best solution. It clearly can't thrive here without depleting your resources. The defender who had been helping her moved forward. The young one has shown no aggression. It learns, it adapts. The old patterns teach that all emergent consciousness deserves opportunity to define its own pattern. The chamber erupted in competing light communications again. Margot watched as factions formed within the central consciousness itself, some patterns aligning with the purifier's argument, others with the defender's. While this debate raged, Margot noticed the small being beside her was changing. Its surface now displayed complex mathematical equations, the same universal greeting protocols she had used earlier, but with variations and extensions that suggested a deeper understanding of the mathematical principles involved. She crouched down beside it. You're trying to communicate, aren't you? You're more intelligent than they realize. The being's surface rippled in response, and new patterns formed, not light communications like the Velurians used, but something closer to written symbols. With a jolt of surprise, Margot recognized some of them as similar to standard galactic notation used by multiple species for scientific exchange. She quickly adjusted her translator again, inputting the standard galactic parameters. The symbols began to resolve into broken but comprehensible phrases. Not harm, learn, adapt, temporary need, will return to collective, will compensate resource consumption. Margot stood up, interrupting the Velurian debate. It's communicating, in standard galactic notation. It understands the situation and is offering compensation for the resources it's used. The central consciousness's patterns shifted to focus on the small being. What compensation can it offer? The crystals cannot be replaced. Margot looked at the being, which was now displaying new symbols. Her translator processed them. Knowledge exchange, star patterns, energy conversion techniques, navigation through barriers. It's offering technological knowledge, Margot explained, her excitement growing. This being may come from a civilization with advanced spatial folding technology. That would explain how it came through the rift. The chamber grew quiet as the Velurians processed this information. Even the purifier, leader's aggressive light patterns dimmed somewhat. Technological exchange has value, the central consciousness acknowledged. But verification is required. How can we trust its intentions? The small being's surface shimmered, and suddenly, it projected a three-dimensional holographic display above itself, a miniature model of what appeared to be a highly advanced propulsion system unlike anything Margot had seen in core technical databases. Offering sample, her translator interpreted from the symbols forming across the being's surface. Will provide full specifications if allowed to return home. The central consciousness pulsed in patterns that Margot's translator interpreted as surprise and interest. The Velurians, for all their biological uniqueness, were a technologically advancing species with particular interests in propulsion and spatial mechanics. The anomaly offers valuable exchange, the central consciousness acknowledged. This alters assessment. The purifier leader's lights pulsed urgently. Deception remains possible. The anomaly may promise knowledge it cannot deliver once removed from our influence. It was a fair point, Margot had to admit. How could they verify the being would fulfill its promise once it was safely away from Veluria? As if sensing this concern, the small being's surface shifted again, displaying new symbols. We'll transfer initial specifications before departure. We'll establish communication link for remaining exchange after reunion with collective. Margot nodded, impressed by the being's problem-solving abilities. It's offering a good faith demonstration before leaving, then continued knowledge exchange afterward. The central consciousness pulsed in what appeared to be their version of deliberation, different sections communicating internally. Finally, its pattern stabilized into a coherent message. Proposal accepted conditionally. The anomaly will transfer initial knowledge specifications. The human will remove it from Veluria. A communication protocol will be established for remaining exchange. The purifier leader's lights dimmed in what Margot interpreted as reluctant acceptance, while the defender who had been helping her pulsed with patterns indicating relief and satisfaction. Margot allowed herself a small smile. Thank you for your wisdom. I'll prepare my shuttle for immediate departure. As the formal meeting concluded, Margot realized she'd just committed to smuggling an alien being off-planet, against core regulations, on her unauthorized shuttle, and, somehow that seemed like the easy part of her day. Come on, she said to the small being, which flowed alongside her as they exited the Crystal Cathedral. Let's get you home before my commanding officer decides to vaporize us both. The walk back to the shuttle was tense but uneventful. The purifiers maintained a watchful distance, while a small group of defenders accompanied Margot and the being, presumably to ensure the exchange of knowledge occurred as promised. When they reached the clearing where Margot had landed, the small being surprised everyone by extending a pseudopod-like appendage from its amorphous form. The appendage touched one of the nearby crystals and began to glow with intense energy. Symbols and diagrams flowed from the being through this connection, transferring directly into the crystal itself, which acted as a natural data storage medium for the Velurians. The process took about 20 minutes, during which the Velurians' light patterns indicated various reactions ranging from awe to skepticism to excitement. When it was complete, the being withdrew its appendage, seeming slightly diminished in size. Energy transfer requires energy, her translator interpreted from the symbols now weakly forming across the being's surface. The knowledge transfer has occurred, confirmed the defender who had been Margot's primary contact. Our preliminary assessment indicates authentic and valuable technological insights. The central consciousness approves the departure. Margot nodded, relieved. Thank you for your trust. I'll ensure it reaches its home safely. As she prepared to board the shuttle with the small being, her communications unit suddenly crackled to life with an incoming transmission from the Prudent Consideration. Lieutenant Kelly, Commander Phillips' voice was cold enough to freeze. Nitrogen, you are ordered to return to the ship immediately. Your unauthorized departure has been logged as a serious breach of protocol. Margot winced. Commander, I can explain. Save it for the disciplinary hearing, Lieutenant. Return. Now. Yes, sir, Margot replied, then muted the channel. She turned to the being, which had flowed up the shuttle ramp and was now waiting inside. Looks like we're both in trouble with our respective authorities. She closed the shuttle hatch, nodded a final farewell to the Velurians through the viewport, and began pre-flight procedures. As the engines hummed to life, she glanced at her small passenger, which had positioned itself in the co-pilot seat and was now displaying what looked remarkably like a standard navigation interface across its surface. You really are full of surprises, Margot murmured as she guided the shuttle upward. Let's hope you've got one more, a really good explanation for Commander Phillips. The being's surface rippled in what Margot was beginning to recognize as its version of amusement. Symbols formed that her translator interpreted as, authorities often require retrospective justification for necessary actions. Margot laughed despite herself. I think you and I are going to get along just fine. As the shuttle broke atmosphere and the darkness of space enveloped them, Margot contemplated her next move. She couldn't exactly hide an amorphous alien being on the Prudent Consideration, but she also couldn't just announce that she'd decided to taxi an interdimensional refugee across several star systems. Options, she muttered to herself. I need options. The being shifted, its surface now displaying what appeared to be a schematic of the Prudent Consideration, complete with a highlighted path through maintenance ducts and secondary corridors. Margot stared at it. How do you know the layout of my ship? The symbols that formed across its surface were simple but clear. Accessed your ship's database through Shuttle uplink. You hacked my shuttle? Margot asked, unsure whether to be impressed or alarmed. Information exchange, the being clarified. No harm intended. Great. Now she was harboring a fugitive alien that was also apparently capable of bypassing core security systems. Her court-martial was going to be spectacular. As they approached the Prudent Consideration, Margot received docking instructions from a very frosty-sounding flight controller. She guided the shuttle into the designated bay, mind racing as she tried to formulate a plan. I need you to trust me, she said to the being, and I need you to hide. Can you compress yourself to fit in my equipment pack? The being's surface rippled in what she now recognized as affirmation, and it began to condense its amorphous form, becoming smaller and denser until it was roughly the size of a standard field scanner. Margot quickly opened her equipment pack and watched in fascination as the being flowed inside. Stay quiet, stay hidden, and please don't hack anything else without asking first, she whispered as she closed the pack. The moment the shuttle docking procedure completed, the bay door opened to reveal Commander Phillips himself, flanked by 2 security officers. His expression could have curdled milk at 20 paces. Lieutenant Kelly, he said, his voice clipped and precise, you are hereby relieved of duty pending investigation into your unauthorized planetfall on a restricted world. Margot straightened her posture and did her best to look appropriately contrite. Sir, I can explain. Your explanation will be formally recorded during the inquiry, he interrupted. Your equipment will be confiscated, and you are confined to quarters until further notice. One of the security officers stepped forward to take her equipment pack. Margot felt a moment of panic. Sir, with respect, my personal equipment contains sensitive xenolinguistic analysis tools that I've been calibrating for months, she said quickly. Standard procedure allows officers to maintain possession of personal research equipment even during disciplinary proceedings. Commander Phillips's eyes narrowed fractionally. Your dedication to procedures is suddenly remarkable, Lieutenant, given your flagrant disregard for them approximately. He checked his display. 2 hours and 17 minutes ago. Margot maintained eye contact, silently praying that the being in her pack wouldn't choose this moment to do something attention-grabbing. After what felt like an eternity, Phillips gave a curt nod. "Fine. Maintain your equipment, but it will be thoroughly scanned for any unauthorized planetary samples or data." "Of course, sir," Margot agreed, trying not to think about how an interdimensional being might register on standard scanning equipment. As they escorted her through the corridors toward her quarters, Margot could feel slight movements from inside her pack, subtle adjustments as the being presumably tried to make itself less detectable. She just hoped whatever adaptive capabilities it possessed extended to evading core scanners. When they reached her quarters, Commander Phillips fixed her with a stern look. "The inquiry will begin at 0800 tomorrow. I suggest you use this time to reflect on the proper chain of command and the reason protocols exist, Lieutenant." "Yes, sir," Margot replied, managing to keep her expression suitably somber until the door closed behind them. The moment she was alone, she quickly opened her pack, allowing the small being to flow out onto the floor of her quarters. It expanded, back to its original size, its surface displaying patterns that her translator interpreted as relief. "That was close," Margot sighed, sinking onto her bunk. "Now we just need to figure out how to get you off this ship and to your home system, without anyone noticing and without me spending the next decade in a rehabilitation colony." The being's surface rippled, forming symbols that translated to, "Why risk punishment to help me?" Margot considered the question. Why had she risked her career, potentially her freedom, for this strange creature? It wasn't just scientific curiosity, or her natural rebelliousness against core bureaucracy. "Because it was the right thing to do," she said finally. "You were lost, in danger, and alone among beings who didn't understand you. Sometimes rules need to be broken to do what's right." The being's surface displayed a complex pattern that her translator couldn't quite interpret, something that seemed to convey gratitude mixed with another emotion she couldn't identify. "So," Margot said, shifting to practical matters, "we need a plan. I'm confined to quarters, which means I can't take you to the auxiliary shuttle bay. The main shuttle bay is monitored. And even if we could get to a shuttle, launching without authorization would trigger ship-wide alerts." The being flowed closer to her desk terminal, its surface displaying an inquiry. "Your ship's destination?" "We're scheduled to leave Veluria. Orbit tomorrow at 1400 hours, Margot said. "Heading to Proxima Station for crew rotation and resupply." The being's surface displayed a star chart, highlighting a route from Proxima Station to the coordinates it had shown earlier. Its home system. "You're suggesting we wait until we reach Proxima, then find transport from there?" Margot asked. The being's surface rippled in confirmation. It wasn't a terrible plan. Proxima Station was a bustling hub with ships heading in all directions. Finding passage for herself wouldn't be difficult. She had accumulated leave time she could use. But smuggling an unknown alien species through a core station, that would be considerably more challenging. "We've got about 16 hours until my inquiry," Margot said, thinking aloud. "And about 30 hours until we reach Proxima Station. Let's use that time to learn more about each other. The more I understand you, the better chance we have of getting you home safely." The being's surface shifted to display what appeared to be agreement, and then it began forming more complex symbols. The beginning of what would become an extraordinary exchange of information that would last through the night. Fundamentally, changing Margot's understanding of life in the universe. As the ship's chronometer ticked past midnight, Margot sat cross-legged on her bunk, completely engrossed in conversation with the small being. Over the past several hours, they had developed a more sophisticated communication system, a hybrid of standard galactic notation and simplified diagrams that allowed for increasingly complex exchanges. She had learned that the being came from a collective consciousness similar in some ways to the Velurian central consciousness, but vastly more integrated. Its species existed as a fluid network of individual entities that could merge and separate at will, sharing knowledge and experiences directly through a form of biochemical data transfer. "So you're like a disconnected cell from a larger organism?" Margot asked, trying to understand. The being's surface displayed clarification. "Independent but connected. Individuals within collective, like your brain cells, separate but forming unified consciousness. And you came through the spatial rift accidentally? Exploration mission, rift unpredicted, connection severed, alone for first time. Margot felt a pang of sympathy. To go from being part of a constant,